Welcome to AI Lab Unfiltered. This is the podcast where we're going to talk about AI and how it intersects technology, education, and society. Joining us today, we got a great episode, don't we, Pete?
I hope so.
This is going to be exciting. We got Charlie Elwood with us, the one and only visionary AI in educational technology. Charlie's got a rich background, decades of experience in AI, and AI technology is how it relates to education and where it really intersects. That's the conversation we want to have today, is really talking about how AI affects our world, where it works, where it doesn't work. So, Charlie, welcome to the show.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. It didn't snow today, and the one thing I always tell people is AI can do a lot of things. West Michigan weather, lake effect snow, it'll never
can't take care of that.
Yeah, it's not going to fix that.
You never know what you're driving into, is what I usually say.
I was just kind of thinking right before we started, like how I even became aware of you, and it might be a good way to intro some of your background. We're going through LinkedIn, and of course, Jen Wangler at The Right Place, the great connector, is like, there's some people that you should get connected with. So I go to LinkedIn and I see Microsoft AI MVP, and my whole life I could work and I've never earned a title that cool, I bet. But could you just talk about like what that means and how you become a Microsoft AI MVP, and maybe start there, and that could kind of go back into some of your background?
Absolutely. That's a very interesting journey, because I was starting my own business 5 years ago. I wanted to do Power BI because I saw how powerful it was to visualize data and give people insights into data. You know, instead of looking at a spreadsheet, you could look at a heat map. It's like, oh, the outbreak is here, or whatever. And so I got into that, and I found a trainer. I was looking for training, and there was an AI MVP. His name is Avi Singh. He's Power BI MVP. And so I started, he taught me all this stuff, and then he hired me to be one of his teachers. And I was like, what is this MVP thing, for Microsoft? And he's like, well, it's pretty cool. Like, you get to, you sign an NDA with Microsoft, and you get to work with some of their technologies before it goes public. And they see you as an influencer. They see you with social capital going online. And I'm officially a LinkedIn influencer now. So I was like, okay, I'll work for Avi for a little bit. And then I was doing a project, the Maria project, where I did sign language for people that are nonverbal using AI. And Microsoft heard about what I was doing, and they were like, you should apply for this program. And I applied for it, not knowing. I actually applied for a Power BI MVP, but I was doing so much AI stuff that they're like, no, you belong as an AI MVP. So you're really an influencer that Microsoft wants to give you their latest technology. They want you to take it out into the world, get feedback on it, and then come back to them and say, this is what's wrong with it. Are the bugs. These are what the world is thinking about AI. I had no idea, but I was like, this is the coolest thing in the world, right? Kid in a candy store. Yeah. Right now they're trading places a lot of times with NVIDIA, and with the DeepSeek, NVIDIA just jumped down. Apple's up there. And I was like, I'm here in West Michigan, and I'm talking to Microsoft, VPs at Microsoft, about the coolest technology in the world. And that kind of led into this conversation. I was using this every day to impact and like change people's lives. Yep. And then I was like, how do we prep the world for the future? How do we prep West Michigan for the future? And I'm going to stop here. But this is an important story, I think, because we now have 2 AI MVPs in West Michigan, and we influence Microsoft. And my goal now is to help with education. Our future generations, data literacy, because I think it's going to change the world. Like, I think it's that important. So,
and almost being like a foot soldier on the ground to help shape the tools from real world experience of this is how people are using it, and giving that feedback to Microsoft, being the mega global company that it is, to be able to shape that tool up, I think is really important. That just speaks volumes that they're paying attention to really making something that's useful.
Yeah, and I've heard from inside, they're like, Charles, we have developers, but a lot of times we sit here in Seattle in silos, and you are our eyes and ears in the real world, and we need to learn from you. So it's really cool. In West Michigan, we get to provide feedback to one of the largest market cap companies in the world.
Absolutely.
That is cool.
So speaking of real world tools in AI in education, which is what you're an expert in, clearly, what recent breakthroughs have you seen that you're getting excited about of seeing some of that AI being used in the AI technology being used in education?
So 2 stories. I use Azure, and this is important for education, Azure AI exclusively. And the reason is because they don't take the data to retrain it. And so for my 3 boys, I give them a version of Azure AI. And Azure is really interesting because, they release the open source models. So I can pick for my boys if I want to use Llama, or if I want to use GPT-4, or if I want to use Phi, their small language models, or just yesterday, DeepSeek was on there.
I saw that.
Yeah. So I started experimenting with DeepSeek, and I saw that it was timing out on me. So I sent an email to Microsoft. Goes back to so I'm learning with them. It was so cool. Nice. And I get a response from Microsoft. It's like, oh, yep, we're aware of this. We're working on it too. We're learning together. And I was like, this is different. Microsoft is saying, so I'm learning with them, but I also give these tools to my boys. The reason is Azure is safe. Their data doesn't go anywhere. And my son was using it to generate practice problems for Calc BC. He's struggling. It's a hard class, college level class. And I actually, goes to education too, and gave me some insight into how he learns. But he was using Azure AI. But when it did calculations or calculus, it didn't show the integral signs and feedback into what he was seeing in his textbook and online training. So he said, Dad, can you pay for OpenAI ChatGPT? And since it was just math data, it wasn't personal information. I said, I'll pay for it. Yeah. But what I saw was when he typed the questions in, Calc BC questions, it came back with the equations in the way he understood, right? And this goes into, I think, a very important conversation about personalization and learning styles and how our children are processing, how they see it in school, and how AI gives them that feedback.
And I think that's important too, because the way we consume some of this information to learn from it, I'm going to learn it completely different than Pete, than from you, Charlie. That AI is such a cool way of put it in and make it into a verbal podcast and spit it out to me, an AI podcast, or put it in and give me as a text or as a graphic, or, just different ways to kind of consume it back to you, I think is super important.
Absolutely.
I remember a conversation I had. So when ChatGPT first came out a couple of years back, we went on spring break not too long after that with some friends, shared a house with them. And one of my friends is a school teacher. And I was all fired up about AI. And I just love thinking about where the future is going with technology, and I'm following it, and especially AI every single day. I'm just consuming vast amounts of data. So we're sitting literally in the pool. We're in Florida on spring break, and we're having a good time. And I start talking about AI, and because my friend's an educator, and start talking about how AI could become the perfect teacher because it can be, to your point about personalization. I have a son who's autistic, and the AI can adjust to his learning style. Not that a human teacher can't do that, but this AI teacher is available 24/7. It never gets tired, never gets sick, never gets frustrated. Mm-hmm. It can constantly adapt to him. And, we're talking about that, and I could just see the not fear, but when that's your livelihood and you're thinking, and you got somebody sitting, in his swimming trunks telling you that this is not going to replace you, but this is where education, I felt, was going. And it was so new to everybody back then, and I've really caught her off guard. And here we are years later, and even my wife, who hates when I talk about AI, is coming around to, hey, I'm doing something at work now where I think AI could help, and people kind of coming around to that. So that popped into my head when you talk about personalization, because I think that's a huge part of it. I wanted to ask too, because we talk about This is this podcast is a spinoff of the AI Lab that Drew and I host every month here. And we talk about inspiration and application. And when you talk about your son using it to create practice problems, like for someone who's listening to this that maybe hasn't ever used an AI tool, or they have, but only to, get funny jokes or a recipe for, chocolate chip cookies or something, like what kind of prompt would your son use to get those practice questions, and how was he actually using it?
Well, that's a great question. And when I first gave him Azure AI, I knew the fear about cheating in schools. They were coming home like, man, my teachers are telling me don't get anywhere near this stuff. And I was like, all right, I'm going to give this to you, but don't use it to cheat, because if you get in trouble for that, I'm just warning you now. I'm not going to back you up.
Yeah, you're on your own.
Yeah, you're on your own on that
AI
one.
MVP tells his kids to cheat.
Yeah. But then I started watching him, after I told him that, and it was really interesting because I think it was for a chemistry assignment. He was struggling with chemistry, and he had watched what I was prompting, and he was prompting it and saying, "You are an expert tutor for ninth grade chemistry, and I'm taking chemistry AP, and I want you to help explain this problem that I'm going to put in, but never give me the answer, but just go through the prompts to explain each step." And so he was telling it, like Socratic method, go to, ask me questions. And he was working through this, thinking of it as a tutor, right? And I was like, wow, like you figured this on your own? He's like, well, Dad, you told me not to cheat. So I had to tell it not to give me the answer. And then it was really brilliant. I was like, keep showing me how you're using this, because this is insightful. And I remember it was an English social studies assignment. He was told to, the teacher gave him the rubric, gave him the assignment. He wrote it in Google Docs, and then he put it in and then copied the rubric in, and it was late at night. And he said, take this rubric and take this paper that I wrote and grade it and give me feedback. And it did it within 20 seconds.
Wow.
And, then he read through, understood what he was doing wrong, which, the traditional style is you wait a couple weeks until the assignment comes back and you've forgotten what you've written. But he had it within 20 seconds of writing that paper and entering the rubric, right? And he was using it to learn and get instant feedback throughout the night. So it's personalized to him. And I remember this was pretty insightful. About 6 months ago, he's like, Dad, Azure AI is down. He's like, this is an emergency. I've tried to use Google, like the answers are just not right. And he's like, and the reason is AI, like I asked it a problem and and I told it what I thought the answer was, and it analyzed his answer and told him where in the process he was getting it wrong. He's like, go to this step. We think you're getting it wrong here, and this is why. And it explained it to him in a way that he understood. So he could just pinpoint where in the process he was getting it wrong. Instead of having to watch a whole video or a lesson or read a whole lesson, it said...
And trying to figure out where he got it wrong.
Yeah,
this is that more personalization again.
Yeah, it took him right to where he was struggling, and helped him overcome that gap. Instead of being demoralized and was like, why am I not getting this? Said, here you go. Here's where you get past this hump and get some confidence and go with it. So
that's cool. It's not that a human can't do it, right? But is that human going to follow him home and sit next to him in the kitchen or wherever he's doing his homework? And to do that for every single kid, like this is such a powerful tool. And I have one more homework example while we're talking about it. So I'm using a lot of Google right now, AI, their Gemini model. And Drew and I were just talking about this before we started. They have something called their AI Studio, and it's free for everybody right now. So if you're listening to this, hopefully somebody listens to this, but if you're listening to this, you can just go look up Google's AI Studio. And if you have a Google account, it's free. And not only is it free, but they put some of their newer models there before they release them. If you were just to use Gemini, where you have multiple options, but they have something that they're calling Project Astra, and it's a multimodal AI, which just means that it can hear your voice, it can talk back to you, it can see what your camera sees, it can see your camera screen if you allow it. if you run it on your laptop, it can see your laptop screen. So be careful with, always be careful using AI, to your point about using Azure where it doesn't send the data back to be trained. That's probably a different podcast episode about data security.
Yeah.
But my daughter was doing geometry homework in our kitchen and she was struggling. And I had just started using Astra. So I got it on my phone and I had it looking out my camera and I just pointed it at the piece of paper that had the problem on it. And I said, okay, walk me through how to solve number 6. Cause there was like 7, this was a cool part too. There's like 7 questions on the same sheet. And I said, walk me through how to solve question number 3. And it knew exactly what number 3 was. And it said, okay, I understand you want me to help you with question number 3. And it walked through. And it, again, I don't want my kids to cheat with it either, but you have the world's best tutor sitting in your pocket. And to use that and to talk through and just to watch that happen, it was just a really cool application of that technology.
Yeah.
Well, and speaking of cheating and ethics, let's talk about that. Let's talk about where those ethics come into play. How can people use it nefariously to cheat? No, let's talk about it. Let's actually talk about how educators, we all agree it should be in the classroom, but there's got to be some guardrails. There's got to be some policy. There's got to be something to hold those ethics in place so people aren't just using it to cheat, where you're not learning anything. Let's face it, these are going to be future lawyers and doctors that are going to be, they don't want people to cheat and use AI to get by. How do we have those ethical considerations? What should educators keep in mind for that?
So as I've seen in Azure, they put in ethical filters, content filtering. Khan Academy, working with OpenAI, has like Conmigo, and it prompts it to kind of go through what my son did, is use never give the answer, don't allow the student to cheat. And I have a great story. There's a coach, he's a teacher at West Ottawa High School. And he and I were starting to talk about AI in classrooms, and he was teaching math, algebra intervention, right? And he's like, I've used a program with AI behind the scenes, and my son has, autism, and he's on the spectrum, and he struggles with math. And, we use this tool that it adapted to his learning. It found his strengths, his weaknesses. It could convey the information to him and adapt it along the way to teach him. And he said, my son went from maybe bottom 4 to top in his class.
Nice.
Right.
Wow.
And he's like, so look at what it did for my son. All parents want their kids to learn, to enjoy learning. All teachers ultimately want their students to learn and enjoy learning. And he was in the school and he's like, I see it. I see what this has done for my child. So we started talking and he's like, if you were me, what would you want me to do? And I was like, start an AI class. And I said, this is a period right now where we're adjusting. We're learning, what's ethical, what's not ethical.
Yeah.
But what I see is there's an old hierarchy. Teachers hold all the knowledge and students just listen and learn. But I was like, with ChatGPT, there's kind of a co-learning going on, right? And I was like, why don't you do something where, and I just proposed this to him. I was like, this is my dream and vision, is you have a class and you have students, learning on their own at their own pace. And then you're kind of walking around and teaching them critical thinking. It's like, don't cheat. That might be on the border and stuff. And he and I went our own way. This was before my trip to Indonesia and the Philippines. And I came back and he's like, Charles, I proposed this to my superintendent and the principal, and I got it. I'm teaching a math class. I'm going to be first day. Everybody starts on the same math lesson. Everyone goes at their own pace. I walk around the room. They teach me stuff about where they're going, how they're advancing, how they're using this tool. I'm showing them ethical ways to use it. If there's any boundaries that, I want to mentor and teach them critical thinking. So I was like, this guy, he gets it. He gets it.
That's awesome.
He's allowing the students to learn at their own pace. He's giving them feedback and learning from them too. I was like, that's incredible story happening here in West Michigan, right?
Nice. Nice.
We got to bring him on as a guest too.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
that'd be awesome.
to really expand that.
I would love for a lot of our educators to hear that story, and we're talking before how much the three of us are passionate about getting the word out about AI and all that. So I think that'd be really cool to have something just focused on that and their successes.
Yeah. Now, speaking of teachers, we know AI is going to clearly transform how they teach. Let me throw this out. Do we think it's going to replace teachers at some point in the future?
I think the teachers that are like this particular teacher, the ones that augment their learning, they will become such great teachers, and they'll teach critical thinking and teach things differently that they're going to be able to impact and expand and scale. And I'm worried for the teachers that aren't trying it out, that don't adopt it,
that are more afraid of it.
More afraid of it. And I was like, especially, we see it. West Michigan manufacturing is hesitant right now. Schools are hesitant. And this, and we could talk about, I went to Indonesia and visited the new capital. And I walked onto the presidential palace after driving an hour through, the jungles.
Middle of nowhere,
and, and I talked to the new director of AI for the new capital city, right? And I was like, wow, they're adopting AI over there. How do we get teachers and manufacturing and everybody back in West Michigan? That's my biggest fear is the people that don't use it will get left behind. I really truly believe that now. And so that's why I'm on this podcast too, is like, we need to get people on board in West Michigan trying this out.
And I agree with you. I think it's just going to enhance. I don't think it's going to replace as much as it's going to enhance how they teach. And again, that personalization of how people are consuming it. Now you've got an audience that can consume it a little bit differently of what you're teaching, knowing what tools are available to reach that individual student versus just the masses. I think that's going to play huge in the future.
It seems like if we're just go off the example that you shared from West Ottawa, that the role of the teacher goes from teaching them the subject to teaching them how to use AI to learn the subject.
Yep.
You're still teaching, but you're just introducing them to a new way of learning. And that sounds pretty awesome, right?
Yeah.
And then you can still be that human presence that we all need. Like I personally think that there will be a school that you can sign up for that's 100% AI, and you take it online if parents want to do that with their kids. Like I think that's inevitable. But there will still be parents who want kids to go to school, to have that social presence and with other kids and with teachers and mentors, because teachers they do more than just teach you the subject, right? They demonstrate values for you, and they become that mentor and that person that you can look up to. I don't remember a lot of what I taught in school, but I remember how my teachers made me feel and coaches, and I think that's the important part that is going to be harder to replace with AI. But I just off that example, I think it's more of, I'm teaching you a new way to learn, not teaching you 1+1. I'm teaching you, here's how you can use this tool to get there.
Yeah. Life skills. I mean, just for me, I 5 years ago, I wouldn't have joined this podcast. I wouldn't have stood up in a crowd of 100 people. But I've actually used AI to augment my storytelling. All of these stories I tell, it's actually because, while I was driving here, I was talking to AI. I was like, what do you think, Peter? And Drew,
I do the same thing in my car. I do the
yeah.
same thing. It's like having another person in the car.
Yeah,
with
this podcast is augmented by AI. But these stories now change people's lives. Like the story about the coach, the teacher. You tell these stories of real personal, emotional connections, making an impact in a student's life, and so it's changed my life. It's brought me closer to other humans. And as a teacher too, like imagine if you could change so many more lives. If you can impact more lives, if you can build better people, teach them social skills, teach them creativity, teach them, and watch them learn and expand their knowledge, with personalized learning. Like, I think that would be a dream, and that's actually my dream right now. I'm living that dream because I gave it to my 3 boys, and I'm watching them, their eyes light up at home. It's like, wow, I just chat with ChatGPT about art and drawing, and I learned about this artist and this artist, and like you see their eyes light up, right? And as a parent, you're like, wow, my child loves learning. Like, this is great.
Yeah, my 15-year-old son, who's a freshman in high school, has a Chromebook laptop, and 2 of his teachers actually let them use ChatGPT for their homework. But it's along the lines of, show me what you learned in here. Don't show me just the answer.
Yeah.
They're less concerned about the answer versus how are you getting to the answer, and using ChatGPT to help them understand how they got to the answer and explain that to them. It's almost like a classroom outside the classroom at that point. And he's used it to build video games. He's used it when I showed him the power of what this can do and just scratching the surface of it. I mean, I was on the free version at that point. It was a year ago. Yeah. He started building some Space Invader video game out of it and was like, Dad, this is amazing. Yeah. He's like, I think I want to go into web development, which is a whole nother podcast. Because I said, learn AI before you learn web development at this point, bud, because it's going to change. It's going to change a lot.
Yeah.
So when you came in earlier, and I've heard this part of the story before, tell me about that story of when you went to Indonesia. It's a little bit of a tangent, but I'll tie it back. It's a good one. I want to explain what happened.
That's a story of somebody from West Michigan, like dreaming and then using AI to go on this adventure of a lifetime. And then, I have a story of coming back. One of the projects is to help children in Indonesia too. So I went on a trade mission to Vietnam a couple of years ago for AI, and I came back, and Michigan State University had me present about doing business in Vietnam. And I talked about it, and they said, you should apply for this trade mission. We're going with the Undersecretary of U.S. Department of International Trade Administration, Marissa Lago, which is cool because we got some, police escorts when we were going through Jakarta. Like, I was like, wow, MVP, this is cool. Like, I'm just a dad from West Michigan, right? So, but I looked at the application. I was like, man, I don't have time. How many people are going to apply? So I put my context, my business, what I do into ChatGPT and Azure AI actually. And I said, here's the application questions. And like 20 seconds later, it had the answers. So I put my own voice into it and cut and paste it in. And I found out 70 companies had applied, 50 were serious, and I was one of 12. That made it on this trade mission, right? And then, so I got in after an interview, and I used AI to help me answer the questions, of course. But they were like,
cheated.
They're like, we want you, and I was like, great. So I was on, and I was like, now I got to pay for this, and I was like. And MEDC, they're like, look at this grant. It pays for half of this international trip, right? So I went to the application, saying, ChatGPT.
How do I answer these questions?
Boom. Sent it in. I got approved. They paid for 50% of this trip, right?
Wow.
I was like, wow. So I flew to Manila, met with an ambassador in Manila, went out with my foreign friend, George Aquino, who now runs a bunch of hotels. Had a lot of great Filipino food. George took care of me, paid for everything. Then flew into Bali. I was like, wow, I'm in Bali, outside the world. And then went to Jakarta, and importantly, and then afterwards I went to Balikpapan. I used to live there, 1983 for 4 years. And it's on the island of Borneo, where orangutan and jungles are, and then went back and saw, I was driving through the jungle, for an hour in this police train of black SUVs.
Yeah.
Right? And then we're going through
it's
the jungle.
It's a little intimidating.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden in the middle of the jungle, you see like cranes everywhere and these big, tall buildings. And you're like, what just happened? And then we walked in front of the presidential palace, and as we're walking up, there's several Indonesian people with us, and they start breaking out in their national anthem,
Nice.
and I'm looking around, there's presidential palace, cranes, buildings. I'm in the middle of Borneo, right? And I was like, what is going on? So But it was so cool, and they have their own AI director, right? And I was like, this is just beyond incredible. Like a dad, family guy from West Michigan, one of the first Americans to visit Nusantara, the new capital, because Jakarta is sinking. So they built this new capital, and I'm here with police escort with Undersecretary Marissa Lago.
Kind of all caught up. You know, that out of body experience at that point.
It was like,
wow, where am I?
What
How did I get here?
Yeah. But this leads back to education and AI, because I talked to the Ministry of Health when I was in Jakarta. And these were doctors, PhDs from the Ministry of Health. And they said, Charles, what we're struggling with right now, the biggest issue is growth stunting in our children. We have, it used to be 30%. We've reduced it to 20%. But our president now is giving free food to all the children because, growth stunting hinders their education. They can't learn. Yeah. It impacts their education. And they said, this is our priority project. We want to give all children, access to a healthy life with the right foods, nutrients, and we want to do this across the whole country. And I started talking to them. It was like, well, AI can analyze that whole process. We can really make a dent. They have budget constraints, because you can imagine, this is the fourth most populous country in the world.
Sure.
And here I was sitting across from them, saying, AI, we can use this to impact so many children. Imagine what happens to their economy, when they allow their children to learn, to be healthy, to grow up, 5-10 years down the road. Yeah. What does that do for their country and for all those children that, are stunted by lack of nutrition, right? So, it was just, AI helped me get there, and AI is helping me change the whole country, right? And give...
That's a real world application, right?
Yeah,
seriously.
It's a dad joke too, by the way. You mentioned something though, where one of the gentlemen you were talking to said that I got no offense to the boomers, but I've got boomers on one side of me, and I've got the really young generation. One's embracing it. One's a little skittish about taking that on, and he's kind of caught in the middle, kind of refereeing that.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little bit, because I guess what I'm getting at is kids are growing up, and we were talking about how they're using ChatGPT. They're using, for that matter, they're using laptops. I didn't have a laptop when I was growing up. Laptops aren't even invented yet. That dates me on that, but they're going to embrace it a lot more. How does that change? That's clearly going to change the trajectory of what they're on. Yeah. And to see that over there, and you said, the whole reason why we're doing this podcast is to bring more awareness to our area in West Michigan and to the U.S., because I don't think we're embracing it nearly as much as some of the other countries are. And this is a prime example where they're all in because they can see the power of what this can do. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Kind of some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually, so I've been doing a lot of professional development at schools in our area, at some university. I just got invited to Aquinas College yesterday. Nice. And Davenport too. But I usually start with, I start with all my conversations at schools, and I get a lot of like missiles and torpedoes.
Sure.
But I say, what are you afraid of? What are you fearful of? And you hear it, and it's typically from the older generations, right? Yep. I had one gentleman at a school, and he said, why do I teach anymore, Charles? He asked me that question. He's like, what do I teach spelling for when you can use this tool? Grammar, why am I there? But it was cool because there was, different age groups within all these audience. And I think, there's always this discrepancy. There's a little more fear, I think, on the older generations. There's less fear. So I asked the audience, like, who uses AI and what do you use it for? And it was very interesting because this particular instance, we had one person who's like, what am I here for, Charlie? Yeah. I could see the fear. And then a younger teacher, a female teacher raises her hand and is like, I use AI. And I was like, well, fascinating. What do you use it for? She's like, well, the multimodal system just came out. And my mother is getting older and she has access issues. And we were designing a new house for her. And so I would, take a picture of her room And I was like, modify this picture and add maybe railing or adjust it, but keep the decorations and everything so we can visualize and I can talk to my mother about how we want to redesign this house. That I'm going to help her build and adapt to her accessibility needs, right? And you could just see the jaws just drops like, wow, what an amazing, I think there is kind of a gender gap in the amount of fear and adoption, but getting them in the same room and having people share their stories about how they're using, but also acknowledging the fear and letting people vent. Because as I was walking out there that day, and I've seen this happen in schools, is a lot of times when I hear those kind of missiles and torpedoes, I acknowledge them. I was like, I would be fearful too.
Sure.
That's actually why I got into AI, is because I was like a project manager. I was like, AI can do all this. I was afraid. But to acknowledge that fear, but then give them kind of a vision from the younger crowd with a story of what it could be in the future. And as I was walking out, there was a group of teachers that said, Charles, thanks for listening to us and thanks for letting us verbalize our fears.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times we get administration maybe that'll squash what we're trying to say and they don't hear us. And, that fear is here. We are afraid of losing our jobs potentially to this technology.
Yep.
So thank you for acknowledging that. But we also wanted to hear, it was an open, safe space for the younger generation to share the stories so we could learn from them too. So yeah, that was a pivotal moment for me when I saw the sharing of knowledge between both groups and them saying that we need to express our fears.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that, I do the same thing when I meet with businesses and companies and ask them about that. First thing I ask out of the gate, what is your fear about jumping into this? Like what is that underlying, I don't know about this. What's your uncomfortableness with that? And then, embracing that, talking about it and working through that, and then showing them real examples of how to bridge that, I think does open a lot of people's eyes, because then they go, oh, I didn't expect it to be like that.
Yeah.
I thought it was just purely to take over my job. Yeah. And no, it's not. That's not what it's designed to do necessarily.
Fear of the unknown, right? And change is hard. Yeah. Even for people that like change is still difficult because there's different kinds of change. There's change that you're comfortable with. Like I'm just like you dove into AI. And I don't know if it was because of fear, it was just an insane curiosity. Yeah. But because I'm aware of it, I feel not that I couldn't be replaced. I probably can. But I want to see what I can do to help get more people, because I think there's so much more helping than hurting than we can do with this technology. Yeah. Which I don't know if we're ready to pivot to. I kind of want to.
There's a lot. So
So you were kind enough to give us your time during Tech Week this summer, and we could have given you 3 hours to share stories. And one of the reasons we wanted to have you on the podcast is because we felt we shortchanged you on the time, and there's so much more that you could share. But you shared some really powerful stories about how you were helping people overcome like communication challenges and things like that. And I'm sure you've got a lot of stories since then. Could you share a couple of those with us? I think those are really powerful examples too. And I promise not to get teared up with some of these too, but like they're pretty heart-wrenching stories too.
Yeah. Those stories started it, right? It was Maria's story, the girl in Puerto Rico.
Yes.
I learned of, spinal paralysis, diabetes. She was born nonverbal. Her mother and her used house signs, and the signs they taught me, like comer, I think help, udame, like these are signs of survival. And she and her mom learned these signs. But I could also see that she signed in her own way. So ASL, or there's different sign languages throughout the world. She couldn't sign to communicate. If you learned ASL, she wouldn't be able to communicate with her signs, right? So we use AI and trained the camera to detect signs her way. And then we took her mother's voice. This was a pivotal moment because I can do neural voice where I can copy your voice, and I tell people that, and I was like, who are scared? And everyone raises their hand. But imagine if you're Maria for a second. You don't have a voice. You don't have a way to communicate and go out and have the freedom in the world to tell your story. If we can use AI to understand the way she signs and then to verbalize it and to have a voice, but not just any voice, a voice she chooses, right? A voice, and we picked her mother's voice, the voice of the person who took care of her whole life, right? And that was a pivotal moment for me when I sent that device and I sent it to her, and I have the picture still. But I was blabbing on. I like to talk, I was like, blah, blah, blah. And I can see they had plugged the device in, and her mom, Isis, went like this. And the device recognized, this is Khmer, to eat, and it spoke it back. And she stopped me, Sid said this. She's like, Charlie. And she had this huge smile on her face. She's like, did you hear that? And she did it again, and it said Khmer. And she's like, the thing just spoke. And you could see the smile on her face, right? It was, for her, it was the possibilities of her daughter, telling her story, communicating with the world in her own way, not being tied to her mother anymore, to speak with the world, right? And then Chris Martin's story is the radio DJ right here in West Michigan, two bouts of throat cancer. This was his livelihood. This was his everything, right? If I didn't work to give him his voice back, he uses a tablet, and he wouldn't have his voice back. And it was a VHS tape. And I remember I was like, VHS tape, where am I going to get a player? And what if the machine eats this tape? But we worked through it. We extracted the voice. We trained the voice. So we got an app to get 97%. He said it's 97% like his old voice. Wow. Types in words, and it speaks back. So we got him his voice back, and I've worked with other individuals too that, typically going into throat cancer surgery where they're told, you may come out of this and you may not have your voice anymore. Luckily for two of those individuals, they went into surgery and got their voice. It recovered, right? But we were able to bank their voice just in case. And they called me, one lady called me and she said, Charles, you don't understand the fear, your means of communication. If that's taken away from you, you don't understand that. That was my biggest fear going into surgery. And the peace of mind you gave me, taking away that fear before the surgery she's like, priceless, right? Worth everything in the world, to go into that surgery, to know that it'll be okay on the other side, right? So she recovered her voice, so she didn't have to use it. But I wanted to add, for Chris Martin, it's kind of sad, but he got his voice back. But the technology, it takes time to type it in, go to the server, bring the voice back. And he started using it in groups of people. And what he found is in our normal everyday conversation, we don't wait. We move on with the conversation. Yeah. So he actually stopped using his neural voice. He only maybe uses it at home with his wife, with people who know, because we all move on to the conversation.
It's a different pace.
Yeah, it's a different pace. We move on. And he felt ignored again because he had to type and wait for the voice to come back. Yeah.
So maybe in the future, possibly even the near future, that technology gets updated to where it's a lot faster for him to use it. So definitely a possibility. Just right now, it's just not quite there.
Yeah, and it moves so fast, right? With DeepSeek R1, less training. There's small language models that are faster, that can be localized. So I think it's almost there. Things move fast. So I think in maybe 3 or 4 years, this technology will be there.
That's interesting.
Yeah. When you think about like where it could go, because my mind goes to, okay, Elon's got his Neuralink going, right? Mm-hmm. So instead of having to type those words, you could think those words. Yeah. And it could, and we're a ways away from that too, but it's just cool to think how you can help so many people that otherwise either wouldn't have a voice or, be able to communicate.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we talked a lot about education. We talked a lot about how young versus old, fears versus people that are embracing it. What kind of strategies do you think that schools or even companies can implement to attract and use more AI? Like, how do we bridge that gap? There's only so much the three of us can do.
Yeah.
How do we get people to bridge that gap?
I think fear is a great motivator. And what keeps me up at night is going overseas to Indonesia, to Asia, and Asians, I'm half Asian, I'm half Thai, and I know my mom just education, education, education.
Yeah.
She's like, this will transform your life. This will move you up in the ladder and the world. And she push, and you can see, that's kind of the perspective Asia sees it right now. Like Singapore, it's like, man, if we give, and which is what they did, they said throughout their school system and for their senior citizens, they gave everybody AI. They're subsidizing it. They're like, we want our country to be the most educated, intelligent, in the world. So they're pushing. So when I go to Indonesia and I see this new city cropping up and they have an AI director, and I see Singapore, implementing and integrating, I start to see maybe we're getting a little behind, and for me, that's what keeps me up at night is coming back to West Michigan, and I don't see the excitement, the drive, the vision into the future. I see a lot more fear, So I think that is one big argument. And I talked to Rotarians yesterday at the Rotary in Grand Rapids, and I was like, I see this gap forming, and I see this gap here in West Michigan, and I want to convey this right now. We need to get on board and move quickly. I just spoke with a teacher the other day, and I think a lot of teachers are women, and I think teachers care about their children, their kids, and I think they want them to succeed. And there's a fear about job replacement, but when I spoke to this teacher and I said, imagine the impact you could have on the children if you start teaching them how to use AI to personalize their teaching, and like your children, like this coach's child. If we make a difference and you give that impact to that child's life and prepare them for this new future, imagine the impact, the positive impact you can have on these children, and I co-presented with her just last week, and she said, Charles, I'm using AI. After our discussion, after learning about what this has done for your kids, the stories you have told me, I'm starting to use AI now. So I think these stories, I keep telling people, like, I've seen it in my children. I used it to help my wife get a job at Penguin Random House. It simulated an interview. It looked at her weaknesses. We simulated, and it turned her weakness into strengths, right?
Yeah.
And she got this dream job. My kids are using it to learn Calc BC, and they're having fun learning. I went on this adventure of a lifetime. I can see what it's going to be like in the future if we use it the right way. And so those are the stories I share, and to hope that people change and adopt it.
Absolutely. What do you think? I know you're thinking something.
No, I wish we could go for like 3 or 4 more hours. And because I was just telling somebody yesterday, if it was my job to talk about AI all day, I'd be the happiest guy.
Likewise.
But I think we've beat you up pretty good with tons of questions. And not to say we can't ask more, but I also want to give you an opportunity to, if you want to plug your business and
Sure.
what you do, and let people know about that.
How do we find you?
Yeah. So Solismatica is my company. Solismatica. I gotta spell it because it's a lot. I had my family name it. The company, and we voted for, it was the hardest thing in starting the business. Nobody would like any of the other names. And finally one night I was like, what about this? And I think they were just tired of voting. So they're like, yes, vote. That's good. So that's the name of my business. It's a family business. But Power BI is where I started, data visualizations. Now I'm into AI. When I went to Indonesia, I think you'll like it. I talked a little bit about this, but how do we help businesses understand? So I talk with a lot of CTOs, a lot of CEOs, and I learned this in Indonesia. Is I had this script and it worked really well. But when you talk about RAG, when you talk about small language models, large language models, GPT, to a CEO or CTO, that doesn't translate. It doesn't communicate the value very well. So what I've done is I actually used GPT 101. But I tell it now, I prompt it. I say, write a HTML file, self-executing. This is the business process I want to solve for this company. This is the one they've identified as the biggest issue for them, be it logistics or engineering or knowledge base. And then spell out all the steps. Tell me the KPIs that AI will impact. So we have metrics to measure this by, and then tell me the type of AI that'll solve each individual, work on each KPI and solve it.
Yeah.
Right. And it gives me a complete map for this business. And then we work together, and we're talking metrics. We're talking process improvement. We're talking, here's where we can make a measurable impact. And, it's almost like 100% conversion when you talk that language versus when I'm talking the technical terms, nothing happens. So, this goes back to how do we get manufacturing?
Yeah.
How do we get
people on board?
In a way, you use AI to speak their language and cross that bridge.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Agree more. Charlie, always great talking with you, man. I love the stories because you travel the world and you just bring back a lot of that education for us as well to understand it. Appreciate you being on the podcast with us and just sharing some of those stories, man.
Yeah, thanks.
Really appreciate
it. It's a pleasure to be here, and hopefully we change a few minds.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
If you like what you heard today, hit the like and subscribe button and learn more about our future podcast and continue the conversation with AI considerations. Thanks.